Hey everybody, this is Darren Van Dam, and you are watching Flick Connection, the show that helps you get more out of movies. And today I want to tell you about 20 intensely underrated movies you can currently watch on Netflix. So all 20 of these movies are intense, they're all available on Netflix, and they're all underrated. They do not get enough credit, in my opinion. Now, some of these are going to be hidden gems, meaning movies you likely have not seen, while others are a little more well-known, but do not get enough credit, in my opinion. And I think even if you didn't really appreciate some of those picks on the first viewing, after me setting them up a little bit differently here, you may enjoy them a second time around. This video is sponsored by CyberGhost VPN, and later in the video I'll tell you how you can get more movies out of your current Netflix subscription using their service. But let's go ahead and start all the way at the back of this list of 20 with my number 20 pick, Battle Los Angeles. Now, this is essentially a classic drive-in alien invasion movie. Think movies from like the 1950s, except this one is shot sort of in the style of Black Hawk Down. I love the way this movie looks. It does sort of lull you into thinking you should take it a little bit too seriously. It's just a silly alien invasion movie. There's nothing too serious to be taken here, despite the fact that some of the performances and everything are really pretty heavy. But I think if you just look at this as sort of your basic drive-in movie, then you can have a lot of fun with it. An example of this is sort of like Independence Day, which obviously came out in the 90s. That one felt kind of serious, but ultimately it was pretty self-aware. It kind of knew that it was this silly sci-fi movie. Battle Los Angeles kind of forgets that. However, watching it through that lens, it is much more enjoyable in my opinion. My number 19 pick is one of the better and more underrated bald Bruce Willis movies, meaning his heyday was really back when he had hair. Not because he had hair, but back when he had hair, and now that he's bald, his movies are hit and miss. Hostage, though, I think is really a hit. And it's surprisingly hard hitting. Bald Bruce Willis tends to prefer PG-13 movies because he can reach a bigger audience. However, Hostage is rated R, and it definitely deserves that R rating. There are some brutal moments in this movie, and in addition to it just being a good Bruce Willis flick, Ben Foster, a younger Ben Foster, plays a really fantastic bad guy in this movie. I enjoy the heck out of his performance, and I also love kind of how wild this movie got. It sort of sells itself on being a little bit run-of-the-mill, and it kind of goes over the top in a good way. I really enjoyed that it got as wild as it did. That's what kind of makes this movie. Had it not really gone over the top, this would have been an incredibly forgettable movie. But if you hang in there and overlook maybe some silly things like a little boy crawling around through air ducts, this movie's got some badass moments in it. My next pick is definitely one of the lesser known movies on this list, but it has been on Netflix for quite a while. If you have not seen Super Dark Times yet, I can go ahead and tell you now, this is a super dark movie. Now, this is a indie film. It's fairly slow paced, not too slow, but in the vein of sort of an indie film that's sort of a coming of age thing, it's fairly slow paced. However, something traumatic happens to these teenage boys and it changes their lives dramatically. And the days that follow this really traumatic event really get very intense. Now, you do have to wait. You have to wait till about the midway point of this movie for things to really take off, but everything that happens up to that point is set up. You're learning a lot about the characters, and then as things change in their lives, what you learned in the first half become very important. And just like Hostage, even though it's a very different movie, this one gets very wild, almost over the top, and again, here, it sells the movie. That is what makes this movie work and what makes it so memorable. Had it not really gotten as crazy as it got, I would have probably forgotten about this movie and would not be recommending it now. But if you're in the mood for something intense and dark and really kind of off-putting ultimately towards the end, this is a really great pick. One of the better sort of under the radar 2020 releases was The Outpost. This is based on the true story of an outpost in Afghanistan that was really just overrun at one point. It was in a horrible location. In the movie, there's a fantastic job of not just explaining all of that, but explaining all the details and the hierarchy and the leadership issues that this outpost had. And it's not boring. Never did I feel like this one was dry. It has hits of action sort of throughout and also some downtime. And then sort of again at the halfway point, the shit actually hits the fan and things get wild. Now, this one never really goes over the top because it's based on an actual event, but it's very, very intense at times. And it really surprised me. They make a lot of movies like this that are sort of these lower budget military movies, and they never really feel right. They don't feel finished or just don't feel like they're respectful or holding true to what happened. Not like the bigger budget ones, again, like Black Hawk Down, American Sniper, movies like that. However, The Outpost really holds its own and ultimately I think punches above its weight. It does have a pretty decent cast for a smaller movie, which I think helps a lot. But it's very well put together. It's intense, but also just a sleeper of a movie. I never would have expected this one to be as good as it is. Now, I consider Polar to be the second most badass Netflix original movie that they've released so far. The first most badass one is featured further towards the #1 spot on this list, but Polar is fantastic in a way that I hope they make more of them, because this one has some slow bits. There's quite a bit of setup in the beginning of Polar, and that's fine. They started off with a bang. There's a couple of things that happen along the way that really keep things moving. It sets up sort of an interesting story. Point being, when Polar was over, I wanted to see more. I wanted to see where this story goes, and I really do hope Netflix sort of embraces that. Instead of just creating a new season of a new series every year, which obviously they should continue doing, I would love for them to start pumping out some sequels. They've done it with a few movies, but if any of them is ripe for a sequel, I consider Polar to be one of the best. And I should also point out, this movie is very graphic, not just in terms of violence and blood, it's sexually graphic. More so, I think, than any other Netflix original movie I've seen so far. If I'm wrong, if you've seen something more intense, you can let me know in the comments below. But very, very graphic, but all done for entertainment purposes. And it really is, even though it is over the top, it's extremely entertaining. Speaking of badass over-the-top movies, Ninja Assassin is a fantastic pick. This is an incredibly bloody movie, and even though a lot of the blood is CGI, it's really done that way because there's so much of it, and also to make it sort of more graphic on the screen in terms of the way that it sort of has a little bit of flair to it. It's a design choice. I don't love that aspect of it. I prefer real blood that sort of splatters and actually looks wet. But Ninja Assassin is surprisingly good. There's actually an interesting backstory to this movie that we don't have a lot of time to talk about, but it did suffer from some production hangups, but also some creative freedom that ultimately give you this almost like bastardized version of what the creators initially wanted, yet some of what they wanted still seeps in and you get some really great, just sort of classic movie elements in this. I think there's the potential for this to have been much better, but that said, it still is a pretty great pick in terms of just bloody, all-out action movies. It's a lot of fun. Now, my next pick is a sci-fi Netflix original movie, and I enjoyed the heck out of it. This is another one that I would happily watch a sequel to, and that's Project Power. Now, this one, while it is violent and there's a lot of action in it, it's not as over the top and as bloody and graphic as some of the ones that I just talked about. It's much more accessible. And in case you missed it, in this one, it's the near future. There is a pill that you can take that gives you a superpower or maybe multiple superpowers, and the thing is, you don't know what it's going to do to you until you take it, and it only gives you powers for a few minutes. Some people just explode on the spot. All of this is explained in the first 5 minutes of the movie, by the way, so I'm not spoiling anything. But then other people get really unique superpowers, and it all plays out really well on screen. Now, what I really like about Project Power is, as interesting as the concept is, it's fairly simple. It's easily explained in just a few seconds, and then the creators had a lot of fun with it. There's a lot of variety in the types of powers that you see. I didn't feel like I was watching like X-Men Light or anything. I felt like I was watching something unique unto itself, which is kind of hard to pull off, I feel like, with superpowers, because it ultimately is all derivative, but Project Power felt uniquely unique. For it to be a Netflix original, for me to just be able to watch on a random Friday night, I thought it was a great selection. Now, every now and then, studios try to do an all computer-generated movie, meaning all the characters, the backgrounds, everything. Essentially an animated movie, but they try to do one that looks real, that doesn't look like an animated movie, and it rarely works. However, if one worked the best, I would have to give that award to Beowulf. Now, this is actually directed by Robert Zemeckis, who is a big-time director. We're talking Back to the Future, Forrest Gump, Contact, and just an amazing director. And he did do a good job with this. I mean, Beowulf is one of the most classic stories ever. Everyone reads it in high school. There's not really a good film adaptation of it. There's some loose interpretations or some crappy ones. This one is the best, and it's also really, really beautiful. Stunning, in fact, which is why it makes this list. But it also features some really fantastic performances from Ray Winston, Angelina Jolie, and there's a lot of action in it. A lot of just really dynamic, beautiful action in this movie. If you've never bothered to watch it with the right mindset. This came out in 2007. It's completely computer generated. It's gonna look a little bit dated because of that, but if you can look past that, there's some really great things going on here. Now, one that is definitely a hidden gem, but also one of the most brutal prison movies to have come out in recent years, is Shot Caller. Now, this is a fairly small movie, but really surprisingly good, which is why it makes this underrated list. And I'm sure I'm butchering this, but in this movie, Nicolas Coster-Waldau, who most of you know as Jaime Lannister, he's thrown into prison. He's a regular guy, and the movie is largely about how the prison system hardens a regular person. There's some brutal moments in this movie, but along the way, it does do a good job of showing you how the prison system turns an ordinary man into an absolute animal. It really does. And then you get some other good performances. Jon Bernthal has a great role here, and some other people you recognize, mostly from TV shows and series. But if you dig prison movies in any kind of way, Shot Caller is a fantastic one. Now, my next pick is the first foreign language movie on this list. It's Spanish language. It's actually from Spain, and it features two of my absolute favorite actors from Spain, Mario Casas and Luis Tosar. I love both of these guys, and they're both in this fantastic gangster flick called Toro. Now, there are some great action scenes in Toro that aren't really elaborate or anything, but they're just really clever and sort of perilous, and surprisingly so, because you don't really see that coming in a movie like this. But this is about a guy who's in the mob, who goes to jail and decides to reform his life. Again, all happens in the first few minutes of the movie, but he's then sort of thrust back into it for one day, and this ends up being sort of a wild and crazy one day as this guy's running around trying to achieve these goals that I'm not going to go into detail here. Really, again, some perilous stuff, some really tense sequences, beautifully shot, really well acted. You either have to read subtitles or listen to shitty dubbing on this one, but it is a cool gangster flick that, again, has a surprising amount of action in it. Now, before we move on to the top 10 on this list, if you have not started using a VPN service, I highly recommend it because it's safe, it's secure, it makes your web browsing private. But in addition to that, CyberGhost VPN has specialized servers that allow you to access Netflix in multiple countries, meaning you now have access to entire new libraries available in those countries. For example, if you're in another country, you're watching this list and all of these movies aren't available where you are, you can access them using CyberGhost VPN. If you're in the US and nothing is appealing to you on this list, or you're still running out of stuff to watch, you can access entire new libraries in the UK, Australia, Germany, Canada by using CyberGhost VPN, and you can use it for as little as $2.75 a month when you use the link in the description. They have a fantastic 45-day money-back guarantee. They have great 24/7 customer support, and you can use it on up to 7 devices simultaneously, and it's all the different types of devices you're used to using. Again, you can sign up using the link in the description below for as little as $2.75 a month. That's less than $3. That's less than the cost of a movie rental to unlock entire new libraries in multiple countries immediately. It's fantastic. I love using it. I know a bunch of you do as well, because you tell me about it in the comments below all the time, which is why they continue to be a sponsor. So thanks for all of the support there. But let's go ahead and move on with the rest of this list. Now my number 10 pick is also foreign language. This one is from China, and it's called Animal World. Now this one is wild. It's almost like a live action anime at times. And yes, your eyes are not deceiving you. That is Michael Douglas. He has a fairly small but very important role in this movie. So here in some of the footage that I'm showing you, you see a clown that's just sort of slicing and dicing up aliens. This is sort of something that the main protagonist imagines, and it plays out on screen really beautiful multiple times throughout the movie. But it is sort of in his head in this weird kind of way, more so than just plain imagination. Now, you get that element of the movie, but what it's really about is this ultimate life or death game of rock, paper, scissors. Sounds a little dry. It's not. It's really cool. It takes place in this huge location, and a lot of what the movie is about is the main character trying to figure out how to win at a seemingly random game of rock, paper, scissors. Now, this being foreign language, you are likely going to have to pause it multiple times. I did. Not because I'm a slow reader, but because they're explaining intricate details of how he's gaming this rock, paper, scissors game. I had to pause it and go back just to understand, like, okay, what is the logic? And it all shook out. It all relatively made sense to me. I thought there were some great twists and turns in this one. It's fairly long, it's epic. It's just a surprise of a movie that I know American audiences and probably audiences around the world have yet to discover. Now, one that is just surprisingly badass for your kind of standard Hollywood thriller is American Assassin. Now, the reason I say that is it's kind of a big budget movie based on a book that typically goes PG-13. You think movies like Jack Reacher. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but they're a little bit neutered. However, American Assassin is extremely badass. It's bloody. There's some wild sequences in this one. Similar to some other ones on this list, it eventually goes pretty over the top. But if you get into the spirit of this one, it's a lot of fun. I really dug it. This is one, like a lot of the ones on this list, that just surprised me. I thought I knew what to expect with this one. I thought it was going to be kind of by the book. It totally isn't, and it won big points for me because of that. Now, Jeff Nichols is a director who has become one of my favorite directors working today. He did Mud, which is also on Netflix. I absolutely love that movie, but I'm not talking about Mud today. I'm talking about Midnight Special. Now, this was only just recently added to Netflix. It's a sci-fi movie that is fairly slow-paced, but it's so well done, I do not mind it. It's got fantastic performances from people like Michael Shannon, and ultimately what it's about is a father sort of trying to transport his son that he rescued from a, what we'll call for the sake of argument, a religious cult. But his son appears very early on in the movie to have some really unique powers. Now, this is not your typical someone has superpowers in the real world type of movie, kind of like Project Power, discussed earlier in this video. It's different. It's more subtle, and also more of a mystery. Just a really great surprise of a movie. If you haven't checked it out on Netflix yet, it's one of the better things that they've added in recent months. All right, now it's time for one of my absolute favorite movies to recommend. I love recommending this next pick because so many of you seem to love it. I love it. It's a surprise of a movie. You will not expect it to be the type of movie that it is, much less as good as it is, except for the fact that I'm about to oversell The Guest. Now, this stars Dan Stevens as a guy who has returned home from the war, and he goes to visit one of his buddy's families, a guy who died in action. He goes to visit, and he ends up staying with his family for a while. Now, most of this movie is fairly slow-paced, but it's interesting and it's mysterious. You're trying to figure out what's going on with Dan Stevens' character, and it does hold your attention. And then eventually things change and this becomes a completely different kind of a movie. That's all I can really say. I try not to give much away on this channel aside from what is told to you in the marketing and the trailers for these movies. If you decide to watch this one, please be patient with it, but the payoff is well worth it. If you do wait, I absolutely love it. I love that Netflix has added it back after several years. It's a fantastic pick. Again, if you generally like my recommendations, don't pass up on this one. And with that, it's time for the number one most badass Netflix original movie. Now, this is just my number 6 pick. It's not the number 1 pick on the list, but it's hands down easily the most badass movie that's a Netflix original that they've ever made, that they likely will ever make. and that is The Night Comes For Us. Now, I have talked about this one quite a bit on the channel because it is such a good pick. If you like movies like The Raid 2, this goes hand in hand with them. Not only are there a lot of the similar cast members and similar type of fight choreography, it is non-stop action. I want to say it takes about 20 minutes getting in, and once it sets off, once you notice that the action has kicked in, it rarely lets up, and I mean rarely. That is very unusual, and not only is it really well choreographed with a lot of action and fighting, it's brutal, it's bloody, it's graphic, it's over the top, but kind of in the best way possible. If you love martial arts movies, fight movies, anything of that sort, just balls to the wall action, this one is the one to go with. Now, I think Patriots Day is one of the best movies from director Peter Berg. He's most famous for Lone Survivor. He also did Spencer Confidential and Mile 22, both starring Mark Wahlberg, also both on Netflix. But Patriots Day is about the Boston Marathon bombing, and I think it's great for a bunch of reasons. One is it's very respectful of the tragedy. The tragedy does occur on screen. It is graphic at times, but I felt like they handled it very, very well. From the filmmaking process, it felt very respectful, but you also get a lot of amazing performances. Obviously, Mark Wahlberg sort of leads this one off, but you also get a great portrayal from J.K. Simmons. This is almost immediately following his sort of big role in Whiplash. You get a great one from Kevin Bacon and a bunch of other people that are all sort of working together in a great ensemble cast to sort of show this really harrowing story, not just of the bombing, but of how they captured the perpetrators. You may remember on the news, this was a big story. There was a car chase, there were grenades, it was an epic chase that happened very, very quickly. And I remember when it was on the news, I was like, man, it was obvious that they were gonna turn it into a movie, but you wonder, like, are they gonna do it right? And I think they did it extremely well in this movie. I don't think they could have done much better, which is why I think it's such an underrated pick. Now, a minute or two ago, I used a phrase, balls to the wall. But my next pick is the most balls to the wall action movie I've ever seen. And just for your information, balls to the wall doesn't have anything to do with actual balls or testicles or walls for that matter. It actually has to do with when you fly an airplane, pushing the joystick or the throttle all the way down. They have like a ball shape on the top. Pushing them all the way to the front of the control panel is where balls to the wall comes from. However, Hardcore Henry definitely fits that bill of going full throttle. This is actually filmed in a very unique way with a rigging on the main character's head, where you see everything from the first shot to the final shot from his perspective. And the main character is portrayed by a essentially silent stuntman. So he's actually doing a lot of the stuff that you see. Climbing, jumping, shooting, and it works surprisingly well. It's not just a gimmick. Obviously it is a gimmick, but it's engaging and entertaining and it serves the story and the story works with that method of storytelling. It's really fantastic, but like some of the ones on this list, and they're not all overly graphic or violent, but some of them are, maybe close to half of them, and this is definitely one of them. Now, one of the most just incredibly intense, visceral, and emotional movies on this list is The Impossible. This is about the 2004 Indian Ocean tsunami, the one that hit Thailand, and it's more specifically about a family of tourists that get separated during the event and have to try to find each other. They're not sure who's still alive. It's a very harrowing story that features an incredibly intense tsunami sequence. When the wave hits, it all sort of happens in real time. So you kind of want it to be over, but it's shot in a way that looks so incredibly real. Very, very real, almost upsettingly real. And then the rest of the movie deals with the aftermath, and it's really an incredibly well done movie. If you have not seen this one, it can be a bit of a downer at times, but it's ultimately a very, very good movie. It's one of the better, sort of lesser known or lesser appreciated movies currently available on Netflix. Now, one of the best heist movies created this century is the best because it takes a lot of cues from the best heist movie of all time, Heat. But the movie I'm talking about is Ben Affleck's The Town. Now, I call it Ben Affleck's The Town not because he's in it, but because he directed it. And this movie made me believe that Ben Affleck was about to be one of the best directors working in Hollywood today. And I wasn't completely wrong. He immediately went and did Argo after this, and while he wasn't recognized for doing a great job as a director awards-wise, that movie did win Best Picture the year it came out, and it is very good, but it has not held up as well as The Town. Now, one of the things that also surprises me about The Town is that heist movies are a dime a dozen, and they tend to sort of be okay or not very good and are easily forgotten about. But The Town manages to stand out, and I think it's largely because it took so many cues from Michael Mann's Heat. In this movie, you do spend a fair amount of time getting to know these criminals. You get to like them, you get to understand sort of the power dynamics and struggles within them, and you're rooting for them during the heist. I think that is key. Even if you're not really into heist movies, The Town is just a fantastic movie all around. I cannot recommend it enough. It has been on Netflix for a few months. I do not expect it to hang out for too much longer. Now, what I consider to be the best movie of 2019 is definitely not for everybody. There's a lot of things about it that are going to put people off. Its pacing, its style is so different from anything that you've seen, it can be off-putting. And the movie I'm talking about is actually a Netflix original in some countries, not here in the US, but that's Uncut Gems. Now, I've said so on the channel before. I think Uncut Gems confused people because your art film crowd didn't care to go see an Adam Sandler movie, and your Adam Sandler crowd didn't care to go see an art film with Adam Sandler in it. But Uncut Gems is not only produced by a Martin Scorsese, it feels like early Scorsese, set in modern times, meaning the music, the vibe, the look of it is nothing like Scorsese, but the type of movie that it is and the type of characters it's portraying and sort of the image of New York is very Scorsese. This movie, to me, as a movie buff, reminded me a lot of Mean Streets, one of my favorite Scorsese flicks. I love that aspect of it. Now, I will say, if you haven't seen Uncut Gems yet, not only is the cinematography beautiful, not only is Adam Sandler really sort of giving a standout performance, maybe the performance of his career in this one, it is very intense. There's a lot of fighting, arguing, yelling. He keeps getting into trouble with debtors throughout the entire movie. It's nerve-wracking. And that's why I love this movie. The directors, which are a team of brothers that also did Good Time, which is another fantastic movie. It's also on Netflix right now, by the way. But they have said in interviews that they wanted to create a movie that felt like an anxiety attack. One of them suffers from pretty severe anxiety attacks and wanted to create a cinematic experience that somehow replicated that. And they definitely did that. I don't want to oversell it because if you don't like the way that I've described it, you're probably not going to enjoy the movie. But if you're intrigued by the way that I described it and you've put off watching it because you didn't think it was for you, I would give it a shot. It's one of the riskier ones on this list, but that's also why it makes the #1 spot. Let me know in the comments below what you plan on watching from this list, and also help me thank the Patreon supporters. These folks donate their hard-earned money to help me keep creating content like this for all of you to watch, so they do deserve some appreciation. If you're interested in becoming a Patreon supporter, there's a link in the description. You can check out what the benefits are over there. If you're interested in becoming a channel member, I now have channel memberships which get you access to exclusive videos almost every single week. So check that out as well if that's a little more intriguing to you. However you choose to support the channel, even if it's just liking, commenting, and sharing, it's greatly appreciated. But I will keep making videos like this one as long as you keep watching them. Thanks for watching this one, and you will see me on the next one.